Hey level uppers, it's Larry, and this is part 2 of the 3-part series around the history of EverQuest's first expansion, The Ruins of Kunark. We pick up with Ryle, Vinral Sather's son, who just sabotaged his father's dark ritual towards immortality, and has now taken the throne for his own. Like father, like son, Ryle aggressively took more and more land, and his reputation was a ruthless one. His loyal warlords, Kern the Executioner, Karaticus of Northwood, now known as Worslick's Wood, and Chosuth the Vampire of the Five Towers of Taraz, now known as Kaesora, were at the forefront of terror, and they had conquered the majority of the continent with the exception of a few giants and the Dragonlands. To ensure domination of the former, the giants, a southern stronghold was constructed, now known as Karner's Castle, to ensure their suppression. Seeing the writing on the wall, the Ring of Scale, or the Collective of Dragons, had an emergency meeting to determine how to best anticipate an impending Ixar threat. A young and powerful dragon, Trachanon, advised that aggressive preventative action be taken immediately. However, he was in the minority with this plan. The minority of the dragons in this vote decided to take matters into their own hands, and they formulated a plan to set up a trap to destroy Ryle on his warship during his next voyage, which the dragon saw to completion. The consequence of this action was severe and triggered not only a war with the Ixars, but also a civil war amongst the Ring of Scale. Ryle's next of kin was his son, Atrebe, an archmage who was much more reclusive than his father. He spent a lot of time in his underground laboratories with his small team of sorcerers practicing the magics of the ancient Shisar, who realized the possibility of fusing two intelligent species together. One experiment in particular, which involved a heretic Ixar and a young captured dragon, created an entirely new race called the Sarnak. These would serve as the meat shields of the new and improved army of Ik. Understanding the aerial disadvantage that his army would face, Atrebe experimented with fusing froglocks and dragons and created a completely new flying beast called the Sokokar. The Sokokar proved to be a very effective flying mount with the droves of Sarnak slaves that had been created. It was now time to strike the dragons. The civil war between the younger, more rebellious dragons and the Ring of Scale was a huge distraction and took their attention away from the Ixars for decades. This gave Atrebe the opportunity to bolster his ranks significantly. With the civil war at one of its most active points, Atrebe and his army of Ik advanced on both sides of the war and annihilated them. This effectively pushed the dragons back into their last remaining stronghold, Viashin's Peak, where they managed to bolster an impenetrable defense. Despite the massive success against the dragons, Atrebe ended up disappearing for unknown reasons. Speculation is that he was either captured, killed, or he was trapped from an experiment gone wrong in one of his underground laboratories. This would leave his first son, Kunark, next in line for the throne and to finally win the war against the dragons. Where Atrebe excelled in magic, Kunark excelled in combat prowess and strategy. The war would be devastating for all things around it, whether it be cities or landscapes across the continent, and the combat technology produced under Kunark's leadership provided his army of Sarnaks, Ixars, and Sokokars with weapons and armor way ahead of their time. The war would finally lead to one massive battle, which would take place in what used to be the Great Plains just north of Kabalis. Jaladar, the strongest and most capable dragon of the Ring of Scale, faced off against Kunark and his Imperial Sokokar, while their respective armies clashed. The intensity of combat was something out of this world. Kunark had the upper hand, and in desperation, Jaladar summoned a horrific spell. Just before the spell was released, Kunark struck Jaladar. In this final collision, the sky would be filled with blinding, incinerating explosions. The majority of both surrounding armies would take devastating collateral damage, which would also take their lives. Once the smoke and debris cleared, the formerly fertile, lush plains were now literally a field of bones. The Ring of Scale would never recover from the amount of casualties, but their hatred wouldn't stop them from achieving revenge. And since the Imperial city of Sebelis was also lacking a leader, as well as an organized army, the dragons found an opportunity to take. Kunark left behind many heirs, however, only one was of age to take the throne, and his name was Shatal. The coronation was quick and void of any real celebration given the circumstances, and with it, the barely of age new emperor would face his most difficult test sooner than later, as Ixar scouts reported that there were some remaining dragons en route to Sebelis. The young emperor did what he could to gather any guards, wounded soldiers, and brave civilians with arms. They mustered up the courage to put up a front line, but the first wave was quickly wiped out. Miraculously, the ragged forces managed to push the war-torn dragons out of Sebelis, but it was the aftermath of the attack when the defending forces realized the true intent of the desperation attack. The imperial palace had been destroyed, and with it, all of Kunark's heirs, including Shatal, were killed. The Sathir dynasty had abruptly come to an end. And that is part 2 of 3 of the History of Kunark lore session. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode, and we will see you soon. Level up hype!